Hi, this is Austin Wintory, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. Today, I had the absolute pleasure of chatting with an old friend and a true fixture of the game music composers community, Jack Wall. Jack is especially well known for his music in the Mass Effect franchise, but most recently has been contributing to all of the Call of Duty Black Ops games, including the most recent Cold War. As is often the case, our conversation covered a ton of ground and was a total blast, and I hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
All right, Jack Wall in London.
So this is Wintory in Los Angeles.
Yeah, this is, the original premise of these was always in person, like at GDC or at DICE. And
that's gone out the window.
Not only it's not just gone, but ironically, in your case, you could be lockdowns notwithstanding, you're basically down the road, and yet we are chatting with you in London. So how is your view from on high over there?
I just kind of got out of here. Cindy and I got out of here out of LA to just be out of the country for the election. I mean, there were literally people going down Sepulveda Boulevard in Humvees with long guns. So we just wanted to get out of there for a while. It was just getting weird. So
it's pretty surprising that LA had its share of Trump rallies.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. The whole concept of red and blue state is silly to begin with. But, there's people who across the spectrum, I think, everywhere. It's just a matter of, it's just a weird American thing, I think. But, it was a bizarre, it's been a bizarre time in America, I think, overall.
This is a year that, to say it will be remembered is obviously glossing over quite a lot. I feel like there's going to be a lot of therapy financed on the back of various ways of dealing with this year from every angle.
There's a lot of angles to hit, isn't there? It's just crazy. And I just, I'm sure you heard, as everyone did, that I lost my agent just a couple of weeks ago, and it's really sad. Cheryl Tiano was just a monster in the industry, and she was an amazing agent and such a good friend of mine, and I'm very sad about that.
It was
2020 can kiss my ass.
Yeah, no kidding. That was I'm happy to pay tribute to her here in that way, just because she never represented me. We chatted about that possibility long ago, and she was one of those people that I immediately thought I could see her being a really killer agent. And obviously, 3/4 of my composer friends she repped.
Yeah,
between you and Jason and so many others.
One of us feel like we were her only client. That was her gift. That and she would in any negotiation, I think everyone felt like she was super professional, but also like there was a win-win vibe to it. Like she never went over the line. She never even approached the line, but she always did the best for her clients. And all that being great, business-wise and all that, the stuff I'm going to miss the most is our friendship. I'm going to get a little emotional here.
It's all good, man.
Yeah, she was great. She was, she would take your call. She would never rush you off the phone. She would, she would always wait for you to say goodbye. She would never say goodbye first. Just
it's a rare quality in an agent, especially at an agency like Gorfain Schwartz, where, I'm sure the phone never stops ringing 24 hours a day for every conceivable reason, from composer clients calling, needing attention, to people calling, trying to pay composers and everything in between.
Exactly.
Yeah, she was a real force in the business. I had no idea. I obviously, she and I weren't that close. I did enjoy bonding with her about her amazing cats.
Her animals were everything. Yeah.
Yeah, she had these gorgeous, like little, not Savannah cats, but there's a similar breed that have a real striking kind of almost tiger-like look. I'm blanking on the specific breed, but I was thinking of getting one of those like 10 years ago. And when I saw she had one, I reached out and was like, I need to know about your experience with these. And she loved them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I knew her better. Cause I didn't know anybody that didn't speak of her the way you are right now. I mean, it's just and composers, especially in the sort of Hollywood branch, like the kind of LA tilted composers, it's such a cliche of people wanting to complain about their agent, but no one ever did about her.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of, and it makes sense to me because of the way she, like, just overhearing her, with other people, like Sarah Schachner or other people in her stable of composers. Just they always seem to be doing well, and she was taking care of them as well, from what I could see. The same as me, and I love that. And it didn't matter how far up the food chain you were; she treated everyone the same, as far as I could tell.
Well, and I think that's a pretty big statement because at an agency that reps like John Williams, people who are working in games could very easily be seen as kind of second-class citizens. It's just she didn't do that.
She definitely treated all of us with just a boatload of respect, and everybody felt good about it. So she will be missed greatly, and there's a memorial that is happening in a few hours that I'm going to attend and hopefully get a chance to say a few words, because I'm just glad we all get together a little bit, even through Zoom or whatever it is, to do that.
Yeah, it's a strange reality that what is effectively a conference call becomes the way we commiserate and find ways to come together. I mean, I admire that as just kind of like a human resilience kind of thing of, we're not gonna not honor our cherished friends and colleagues. So even if we have to do it on a fucking Zoom call, then we will do it. There's something about that I find very uplifting.
Well, it's important, especially now. I mean, the first thing Cindy and I were talking about is, I said to her, I looked at her, I said, oh my God, I'm in London. We're going to be here for a long time. How am I going to, do I go home for the funeral? And she looks at me and said, Jack, there's no funerals now. I'm like, oh, you're right. So this is what it is. So at least we get to do this, which is great.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I appreciate, in the context of all that, you setting aside some time to talk some games, talk some music. Life always,
absolutely,
life and work, and there's always that discussion of the work-life balance. And for me, I've always seen it as kind of deliberately messy, because when you care about your work, at least speaking, if only for myself, all these things get blurred together. But even despite that, I'm glad that that we made a chance to do this, because I've been eager to chat with you here basically since we started doing this. I tell your story a lot.
Which one is that?
Well, yeah, all the ones that would get us thrown in jail. No, I love particularly, I get a lot of composers reaching out to me who are, just graduating from school or pivoting into music from some other career and deciding to pursue the dream. And people just reaching out or leaving comments on Twitter or wherever saying, um, how do I do this? Where do I even start? It's such a big monster to try to grab by the horns. And a story, I love bringing you up. I literally do probably 9 out of 10 times especially if I'm in a real conversation with someone about career trajectories and arc. You're someone, because you are a real anomaly, if I may say it, in this business, because you've been around a lot longer than most other folks, and you have found ways to reinvent yourself, and you've also stayed, at the like the leading edge. I mean, the fact that mere days ago, a massive new Call of Duty, and it's like your 40th one scoring, came out.
Divide by 10 and you're spot on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's more than one or two. I mean, you've really come to dominate the sound of that franchise. And obviously, particularly speaking the Black Ops kind of neighborhood within there. But it's a tough business to sort of, to put it bluntly, to stay relevant in. There's a lot of folks that, it's true of any creative field. I mean, look at actors or look at filmmakers, or, it's sometimes people are given their shot. They have a great little flourish of creativity, and then somehow things seem to drift away. And I've always admired that you've found ways to really remain a voice that people are interested in, care about. And the reason I bring you up specifically is because it's my favorite story ever that I'm going to humbly ask that you restate for us here is your connection to Mr. Tuey.
Yes.
Began the most fabulous way. And it's a perfect lesson in you never know what will happen, and you never know, more crucially, how long a relationship needs to kind of manifest into something else. And I just think it's such a powerful lesson for people, especially those that are feeling very stir crazy and feeling very impatient and restless of, how do I want to get going. I want to have had my big break yesterday. And it's like, just recognize you can't control time. So anyway, the story I'm aimed at here. If you would,
I do. Mr. Tuey being Brian Tuey, audio director currently at Treyarch and has been for some time. Yes, Brian Tuey and I worked together. I think the first time we worked together on Call of Duty was Black Ops 2, and that was in 2011-12 timeframe. That was my first Call of Duty. Now, 10 or 12 years before that, I was working with him at a much smaller developer as a freelance composer. But earlier in my career, with him at a place called Gigawatt Studios, very small shop that did a bunch of stuff with Mattel and other licensors, and we did Disney and stuff like that. So I did a bunch of games with them, and one of the games that Brian and I talk about, like, we went from it's sort of zero to hero kind of thing. We went from something called Barbie's Secret. What's it called? Secret Agent Barbie. Sorry, something like that. Why can't I remember the name of it?
I always just say it's a Barbie game.
Barbie's Secret Agent. That was the name of the game. And Barbie is this international Barbie's James Bond character who's running around solving crimes and international crimes. And it was my daughter's favorite game when she was 4. She's 23 now. So it was inauspicious beginnings, right? And then I think in 2010 or 11, Brian at Treyarch they were looking for a new composer for the series, and they were playing through Mass Effect 2 at the time, which had come out in 2010, and they all loved that game. And Brian looked and saw who did the score for that. Let's get them. And it was me. And he called me and he's like, dude, I had no idea, because we hadn't really been in touch for all that time at all. And he just called me up and said, hey, are you interested in, Call of Duty? I'm like, yes, a little bit. And, it's one of the great, it really, truly is one of the great relationships of my career. I mean, careers are made and broken over relationships, right? Exactly. I was, and I've experienced it all. I was not invited back on the Mass Effect series for the third installment, and that was heartbreaking. But at the same time, somewhat of a relief, because it was a tough working relationship. But I love that game. It was such an important game.
Yeah, I want to talk about those as well, just because it's just one of those seminal work, and it's also, personally, it's just one of my absolute favorite franchises of all time.
Yeah, and looking back, saying, oh, it was a tough relationship. Those games were tough to make because, lines were being crossed, things were being done that hadn't been done before, and it came out great in the end. So it was just hard work, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, clearly.
It generated something that's truly memorable, and they're coming out with a remaster of the whole first three. It's great. It's just wonderful. I can't believe, what game has that kind of staying power? Very few, right? Final Fantasy does that. There's very few games. Halo does that. Mass Effect does that. And that's such an honor to be part of it, so very cool. But then, Brian and I have been working together now. We just finished our fourth game, and we're already talking about the next one. It's like our relationship is really solid, and it's just, I'm so grateful for that relationship, because that really truly is the longevity that I experience. It's that sort of thing.
Well, and it's just such, yeah, I mean, you said it perfectly. Every career is, your body of work, of course, matters, but the fact that he was like, oh, Mass Effect's pretty cool, let's look at that. And then your name, you're not the only composer involved in Mass Effect, but seeing your name, you would have stood out instantly, just because it was like, hey, I know that guy, I like that guy.
Yeah, and we had a history. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had a great relationship at Gigawatt. It was, everybody there went off and did great things, and that was no different. Brian being the audio director of one of the biggest, they have 300 employees. It's been around forever, and they will continue to be. They're always doing great work and always complaining about it could be better, but that's just because they're passionate about it and they just want to make it better all the time. And I think this is one of their best games ever, actually, Cold War. I
was hell-bent on playing it in anticipation of this call, and my internet was kind of slugging along, and it's like 1,000 gig download. And so I wasn't able to play it before. I was able to listen to the score, which is, it's very you. In fact, there's some stuff with the kind of analog synth vibes that actually gave me these wonderful Mass Effect flashbacks but fused with this kind of Russian, Comrade Wall that was like the whole thing was delicious. But yeah, I'll report back when I have a chance to play it. I've always enjoyed that the single player campaigns of Call of Duty, just broadly, like whether we're talking Modern Warfare, Black Ops, that's one of those uniquely satisfying. They always seem to be magically the exact right length for what I'm looking for. I'm like,
and this one's actually short too. This is a fairly short campaign. Probably not the least reason is that I think Sledgehammer. I think everybody knows this. Sledgehammer was originally slated to put this one out, and then something just sort of fell apart at that company, and so Treyarch was asked to sort of stand up and make it happen a year sooner than they would have. So they did a pretty phenomenal job, and so did Raven Software. Also, they came in and really masterminded kind of the whole single player campaign, which is that's no small ask. And I thought they did a really great job with it. I thought the story was really cohesive, and it was really a joy to score. And it was like, usually my Black Ops scores are kind of all over the place. They're so varied because basically the gameplay takes you all over the world. And, I like to sort of score the location as well as characters and stuff like that. And, but it's harder when you do that to sort of recur themes and make that more memorable. And in this case, it was all very contained. So it was all about one story that happened during the Cold War. So I was able to keep my themes really, I only had 2 or 3 of them, but they keep recurring. So it's satisfying, I think, to listen to it and hear that. And as a composer, creatively, that's a really cool thing. It's very film scorey to do.
Oh yeah, we love that. I think in general, the just sort of broad umbrella of Black Ops has given you quite the playground between this and all the kind of zombie like side quest, as it were, the side mission of scoring that and that's taking you with all the big band. And I want to get into all that, but I just to put a button on the relationship thing, to me, it really is such a magnificent story that this was like, what you like 98, 99, something like that you guys were doing that, you said?
What's Barbie Secret Agent? Yeah, it's more like 2000, somewhere in there. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Point being, there's just not a lot of and I love that. I mean, that's solidly 20 years ago. And there's, it's this industry. I find games as an industry is pretty fascinating because right around 2000 was when the whole thing kind of started to mutate into the industry as we identify it today. And like composers started to become freelance as a more normal thing, whereas prior to that in the 80s and 90s, it was pretty much strictly in-house composers. And it was no longer like you could actually write music as a traditional composer, even if there's not a recording budget. It's just you could produce music in a way that's familiar to all other composers, as opposed to having to be effectively a programmer who's forcing the hardware to play back music for you in the way the earlier generations of composers were. And so the point being that there are very few composers who kind of survived over the hump of that transition. Like there's a lot of luminary figures from the 80s and 90s. And then there's, people that emerged in the wake of that, but there's very few people that seem to straddle both. And you definitely are of the, you were kind of right at the front end of that, of the kind of rebirth of the industry. Peter McConnell.
When you say front end, you're absolutely right. It was right at the beginning, because if you think about the technology, meeting the challenge, right? Because that's what you needed. You needed technology to get to a point on a computer where you could actually play full res music, right? So the CD-ROM was released for the very first time in 1993. And it came standard with every PC that you bought back then. And that was still early days of PCs, really. But that's when the mass market really started. That's when the game Myst came out, and all these that's why Myst was so successful, because it was OEM with every single computer purchase, right? So and it was the killer app. So you had the ability, because you're talking about a floppy disk with 5 megabytes on it, and then you go from that to a CD-ROM with 700 megabytes on it. So it's like night and day technology-wise. So I started writing at the end of my first game was at the end of '95 when all that was very new. And
what led you to that? Let's just get a little background bio on the record here.
Oh, well, you probably know the story because we've talked about it. Probably
for the benefit of our fair listeners.
Yeah, I just didn't want to bore you again. But
not at all, man. No,
sure.
I love it.
I was a recording engineer in the late 80s and early 90s, working in Manhattan in the music business. And sometime around 94, I was working with this band on Capitol Records. called 2.5D. They were kind of an avant-garde rock band centered around the lead singer, who was a software designer, and she had created this new software that Capitol Records was interested in called Relationship on a Disc, or the acronym was called ROAD. And basically, you could interact with your favorite artists in an interactive way on a CD-ROM. So what her idea is, let's do, everyone was trying to figure out what to do. They called it new media back then, right? Like,
Yeah.
how can we get, like, how can we have she was using like Jungian archetypes to, sort of do conversation trees, right? So, if you asked Mick Jagger, a certain question, and he would answer it a certain way, and then you would answer, you would ask another question, and then you would, over time, create this, through this dialogue tree, you would create this relationship with your favorite artist, kind of. And so that was her invention. And
pretty ahead of its time, to be honest.
She was always ahead of her time. Like that. I mean, she was in Wired magazine, and with Peter Gabriel, and she was talking to him, and she was doing all this crazy stuff. And this girl is Cindy Shapiro, who, full disclosure, she's my wife. So Cindy was really kind of at the forefront of technology and music, right? So Gary Gersh, who was the head of Capitol Records, signed her to a development deal, and I was actually working on those recordings with them, and through over time, we just became kind of close friends. I took her out for a drink. I said, I really want to pick your brain about this game thing, and all the bandmates were kind of like in the background going, oh, I think Jack's going in. I think he's going to ask her out and all this kind of stuff. But, I was really just thinking, I just want to pick her brain, So I did. I took her out, like 6 hours into that meeting, I realized I was on a date, it was that kind of a deal. So,
she also realized the same thing.
And we just really got on really well. So, and we still do to this day. So, she was a software designer during the day, working for Channel 13 at the flagship PBS station in Manhattan, in New York. And, so, she was working on games, basically, for lack of a better way to put it. They were educational games, but they were games for kids, for computers, and all that stuff. So I just got into her head about it, and then she introduced me to Myst, and then before long, she, through our relationship, she said one of her best friends started a game company, and this guy asked us to do the music for that game. So that's how I started, and that was back in '95.
And you were always freelance, right? Like before.
Yeah, I've never worked for anyone in my life. I worked because I have a degree in civil engineering, so I worked. I got into this whole business kind of late. I was 31, I think, when I started writing that game. But I had a whole career as a recording engineer, mixer kind of guy, and before that, I was a civil engineer. So I worked for one civil engineering firm in New Jersey for about a year, and then I just became a bartender because I didn't want to do that, and then eventually I got into the music business.
I didn't actually remember the civil engineering or the bartender bit. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I have some great stories about that. I had no idea how to bartend. I'd been a waiter through college, put myself through college, and I remember I had an audition, believe it or not, to be a bartender at this really hot restaurant in Philadelphia. And
I'm picturing Coyote.
We had this beautiful big house, me and a roommate in New Jersey, and I was making this transition pretty fast. So we invited all of our friends over and told them what bottle of liquor to bring. And I put a big blackboard up behind the bar that I created, and I told them that once I made them a drink, I would cross that off, and they could only order from the drinks that were on the menu. And then once I, it was like 100 drinks on the menu. So I had to make all those drinks. That's how I learned how to be a bartender overnight. And then I went in the next day, and the bar manager was like, yeah, this guy said to the other bartender, like, yeah, this guy really seems to know what he's doing. It's kind of hilarious because I sure didn't. But
That's so funny. I now there's two reasons why I'm going to end up talking about you to folks all the time. Because there's a story I love to tell where one time this girl came over to my studio looking for career advice, and she was, composer, trying to figure out how to make inroads, and so we just got to talking about, all kinds of career and that sort of thing, and then at one point it was really clear that she was not earning a living at all from music, and I said, do you mind I asking, how do you pay your bills? And she looked very shy and sheepish and said, well, I actually bartend, and as if there's some shame in that. And I was like, why are you acting like you are embarrassed to tell me that? She's like, well, it's not music, and that's what I'm supposed to be doing, and a lot of that. I said, but bartending, first off, any job can teach us whatever we want to learn from it, to be honest, if you go looking for the lessons. But bartending in particular, I said, you're literally creating things for people. I said that it is a creative job. I said
that was one of the best jobs I ever had in my life.
I believe it.
Yeah, because for the simple reason that I loved meeting new people. I loved getting new ideas. I became friends with, through this job, I became friends with like the mayor of Philadelphia, Ed Rendell at the time. Like not friends, but I mean, acquaintances. I was friends literally with this investment banker who worked down the street because he was a regular customer. He would invite me over and we'd have coffee and just talk about life, and I just got to meet all these great people. And, it was just a phenomenal job, really.
That's funny.
Fantastic. It gave me the impetus to move on, actually. It actually gave me like ideas. Because I remember going to see this banker and saying, I don't know what to do with my life. I'm 25 and I have no freaking idea what I'm going to do. And he's, I expected, by now or maybe by 30, I'll really know what I want. And he just looked at me and he goes, maybe not. He's this really easygoing guy. He goes, yeah, just give it a shot. Maybe not. Maybe you won't know. Who cares? Whatever. It's the adventure. It's the journey. It's the, the whole thing. He was very zen about the whole thing. And I was just like, oh my God, that actually changed my whole perspective so much. And you never know when someone is going to do that to you. They're going to change your whole mind, your perception, your perspective. And then suddenly you've got like a direction you can go. You may not know exactly where you're going, but at least, I'm directed now. I feel like I can head down this new path, and and so I followed that dream literally because he said that. I said, I'm going to move to Boston and learn how to be. I'm going to go to Berklee College of Music, and I'm going to learn how to be I'm going to learn how to do music in the studio. That's what I'm going to do. And of course I went there and didn't do that. I found a new way, but it gave me a direction,
Were you playing music on the side of all this? Or
hell yeah. Yeah. I was always playing music. I was always in a band. I loved music. Always had a band, always was trying to write songs, trying to do stuff like that. But I never had the aspiration to be like a film composer. That wasn't even on my radar back then. I was just more into the music side of things.
So what were you like guitarist, or what was your
I was a guitarist. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I see. Got it.
Everybody was a guitarist, weren't they? I think. Yeah.
Well, you could have said bass.
I was one of many.
It was giving you a little bit of a landing zone there. Well, yeah, that makes sense then. And so then you started engineering. What set your eyes on? Because you compose, like there's a few different types of composers. There's, the folks that they see writing music through the lens of having played in a band, and right. It's very much coming from that performance instinct. It's coming from the angle of like, I feel music through my fingers or through my hands, that kind of thing. And then there's the more classical, the composers who are coming from, they think in terms of like staff paper and treble clefs and that kind of thing. And to them, it's a written exercise. It sounds like for you, you're as an engineer and as a performer, you were coming at it from that angle. But it sounds to me, but what's striking about that is you wouldn't guess that listening to your orchestral writing because you really know what you're doing and really write earnestly in that way. So how did you make that?
I didn't know that.
Well, that's why it came as a surprise to me when I learned your background. Whenever I learned that, it came as a surprise because I had always assumed you were one of those more bookish composers, we can say, where you were coming from more like growing up. If you have a choice between like my hero is going to be Jimi Hendrix or John Williams, I would have absolutely assumed you were a John Williams type. And
no, not at all. Like I didn't even know. I loved Star Wars, but I didn't even think about the music, honestly. I really didn't.
Yeah,
like that's the thing that's like. I know so many composers who are like, oh my God, I grew up listening to John Williams. I want to become a composer. Yeah, that was not my path. I like it. I sometimes look back on that time, like my my childhood and my growing up years, like what did I like back then? I was just into music. I loved listening to, the radio. I mean, that shows how old I am. But yeah, I mean, I was, it's kind of weird that I ended up doing this, but it's just one of those crazy meandering paths that led me to it. And then I realized how much I loved it. And, all the bookish stuff, I have studied privately with people, orchestration and counterpoint and harmony, all the composition, like those things I've lightly studied as a individual one-on-one with other people and conducting and all those skills that you learn in college. I kind of did it on my own, but I'm literally at this moment, I've got time off. COVID has hit. Nobody's banging my door down for new work right now. So I'm thinking I could just take some time and maybe go back to studying a little bit and try to get a new perspective on music. Yeah, because I've been doing this a long time and I get bored with my process, I kind of want to shake it up. Like I like the idea of maybe what I'll do is I'll put my computer away and I'll just have my piano and a piece of paper and a pencil, and I'll learn to do it that way. And I'll force I know it's hard to do that if you haven't done that. But I have tried to do that in the past, but I'd like to see what happens when I do that and to see if I can just break out of my sort of habits, There's a number of people I'd love to study with, like Bruce Broughton or, Neil, oh my God, he's a good friend of mine. I can't remember his last name right now. He's
Neil
just escaping me. Thank you. Neil Desby. He's kind of a genius.
He is, yeah.
People like that, just maybe study with them and just see what happens,
Yeah, I when Doom came out in 2016, Mick Gordon gave a TED talk, a GDC talk about his process, and that was kind of his mantra throughout that talk was, if you want to yield new results, change your process. And how he, he said he approached that score differently than he had approached prior works to intentionally force himself somewhere he hadn't been. And,
I love his work. I really do.
Oh yeah, that was one of the most jaw-dropping GDC talk. I think everyone will remember that as just like anybody who was in that room.
Unfortunately, but yeah.
He was a force to be reckoned with that day. It was pretty amazing.
He's a unique cat. He's just such a gifted producer as well. Like I don't know.
No kidding.
His stuff sounds great. As does yours, my friend.
Well, you're very kind. It's all. I actually had the great pleasure of reversing the tides on here. I guess it was during E3.
Somebody else interviewed you? Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, Robin Hunicke, who was the producer on Journey, and she's also kind of the
nice.
The recurring guest host of this podcast, interviewing mostly developers. But because she and I had the working history, we've done 2 games together. It was like, why don't you guys chat? And the funny thing is that it was probably an emotionally exhausting thing to listen to because she and I have this very kind of raw, unfiltered relationship. And it always, every conversation, we skip right past how's the weather and go straight to like, how's that existential crisis treating you? And we go just, and so I don't actually remember. I only remember that our conversation got really sort of vulnerable and intense, but it was so us that I thought, oh well, I wouldn't change anything about that then.
I think this is going well. I mean, so far we've laughed, we've cried. So
yeah, man. Well, you're the real deal. That's the thing. That's why you're. I was just so genuinely looking forward to this, and so to that then. The thing I don't know that I have ever asked you, and I don't know the answer to, is how you really then. Yeah, I mean, I get that you were kind of learning on the side and just learning by doing. There's something to be said about taking on a job where you're going to have to do something that on the day you sign the contract, you don't actually know that you don't really know how to do it.
Right.
And like you're just trusting that you can figure it out. And I think that there's something to be said for just embracing your own potential more than the confidence of like, yeah, of course I know how to do that. And but where did you? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think if you hear anyone who's like ultimately successful in what they're doing in the arts, the arts are intentionally, they're just, they're visceral, there's nothing to really grab onto except, your inner belief that you can do something, right? So when somebody asks you to do something and you don't know how to do it, what do you say? You say, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I will do that.
Exactly.
And you just figure it out. That's the bottom line. You just have to do that. And it yields, just to put that kind of pressure. If you're not riddled with anxiety, to the point where it's detrimental to your mental health, like I think that, and that's something that can be overcome, of course, but I think that you just need to have faith in yourself. I think it's really important to just say, yes, I can do this, and then figure it out. And I just, I've done that so many times in my life. I've done that so many times in my life that, I have ultimate faith that I could do just about anything at this point. And I push myself to do things I haven't done for that reason, because then, if I'm just writing the same music I've always written, that's where all the big band stuff came from. I have a love of big band music. It comes from my childhood. My dad played it all the time. So I had that in my head. I just had no idea how to do it. And then I just learned how to do it real fast, and it came out great, And of course I hired people to help me get the arrangement right, because I'm not a jazz arranger and I don't pretend to be. But, I think the results are, I'm really proud of that. It was just something somebody said, hey, who's going to do this jazz thing we need? And Brian Tuey said, well, Jack's going to do it. Like he had faith in me, so why shouldn't I, right? And I did it.
His ignorance served you well. That's so hilarious. Yeah, and so we're talking about on Black Ops 2, right? Right? I'm not.
And 3 and 4, we did jazz on all that stuff.
The initial time, that first time.
Yeah, the first time, yeah.
Was for the it wasn't that for the zombie mode, like the zombie.
Yeah, all of it was for zombies. Yeah, it was Shadows of Evil, which is the first time they had put that was the first time they had put zombies on the disc at launch. Usually it was DLC before that, but yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and so and then another great part of that story. We're just kind of zooming all over the place here, but I love it. I always love your snakeskin boots, like the songwriting that went into that, which was also a chance for you, for the way that you talked about Cindy in the beginning of this conversation as someone who's coming from, software, where software and the arts meet, and kind of innovative ways of merging these otherwise unrelated disciplines, and obviously discovering, hey, we're on a date, and you've had a family together, all of that stuff. We're glossing over the fact that she's also a musician and composer and musical mind in her own right, and that gave you guys a chance to collaborate, which I think was that not the first time you had been able to collaborate, like bring her into what you're doing?
Oh, I mean, she's a singer too, so I hired her countless times to sing. But I think that was maybe the first time we wrote together. I don't know. It's been a long road with her. We've been down that we just celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary, so we're pretty happy about all that. But yeah, it's funny. Like they asked me to do this, and I'm like, and it had to be songs, and the songs had to have meaning, and I thought, well, I could write the lyrics. I can write lyrics, but if you want good lyrics, it shouldn't be me.
Yeah.
And Cindy is genius at lyrics, so I love her. Like I would never work with anyone else in terms of lyrics. I just love the way she writes lyrics and how thoughtful she is, and she allows me to kind of kick in my ideas too. But it's like I'd be a good background singer. I wouldn't be a good lead singer. It's kind of like that, right? Like I can contribute something really cool to this, but I don't want to be the lead on it. So between the two of us, we got the lyrics, I think, pretty cool. And I think it's one of my top most streamed songs on Spotify. But the Mass Effect always kills it, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, I think it is actually, because I pulled up, in order to listen to Cold War, I pulled up your page on Spotify that just compiles everything together, and Snakeskin Boots was, I think it was number 1 or number 2, and I just love that. It's like who would guess that the runaway hit from Call of Duty. Call of Duty Black Ops, like you instantly start thinking, like you go straight to this headspace of orchestra and grungy synths and all the loud drums. Oh, absolutely. And you obviously recorded a bunch of that in London, with the top players on the planet, and that it's all done, all the bells and whistles, and yet this sort of swing tune, this kind of scorching big band song. Is the thing that rises up. I just love the randomness of that. I love the kind of.
Well, I mean, the genesis of this was it's so funny how like a composer can sort of help drive, what actually happens, and so much kudos to Treyarch. They always give me freedom. They just let me run with this stuff. They don't hold me back ever. So what they said was, okay, we need a big band tune. This is the only thing they asked for. They said we need a big band tune that is sort of a torch song, because the main character, the girl, is going to be singing in a nightclub. And so we need a song for her. And I was like, oh, cool. And it's like jazz and big band and stuff. I said, cool, I'd love to do that. But I said, listen, I got the musicians for 3 hours. I can record a song like that in maybe 20 minutes. So why don't I write like an up-tempo kind of swing tune as well? Because I think you guys are going to want that, And thank God I said that.
I love.
So I was just like, I think you're going to want that, And they were like, oh, can you do that? Do we have the budget for that? I'm like, listen, I'll make it work. Don't worry about it, So we were able to fit that in, and then there was all these kind of fun little, jingles for the Coca-Cola sodas that they had. So we had so much fun doing that. It was so fun to write these funny lyrics and these little stupid little jingles that everybody loves. And so we did that, but then Snakeskin Boots was born out of that, and then they ended up using that to launch the whole zombie mode, because that was just
it was like a trailer.
Piece. Yeah, they just cut it into the trailer. It's so cool.
I remember it well.
Yeah,
I love that, and I love that's another thing about that is just another one of those wonderful lessons, is that you never know where, like if you approach this career openly, it can take you places that you would never plot on your own. Like you didn't sit down and say, okay, 5-year career goal, I really want to write some swing music for Call of Duty.
No,
like
furthest thing from
that,
my mind. Yeah, exactly.
That's no one. That's not even. That's not a sentence anyone ever said before. That is like in the history of humanity. I doubt that was a phrase that existed. And so I love the kind of chaos of that. It's just fantastic, and it turned out amazingly. I mean, that's one of the things that I've admired in your writing in general, is that as much as you clearly have a producer's ear, for really crafting the sound, there's always been space for the musicians to really be musicians, because big band demands that, as much as the notion of being like a top phenomenal jazz producer is a viable thing. Mm-hmm. Big band is nothing if jazz in general, but big band in particular, is nothing if you're not really hearing the performers, if you're not writing it in a way that really lets them speak, because it's a performer's art. That's really, it's just one of those idioms of music where it's like speed metal, where, like that, you have to hear them play because that is the sound. That's what it is.
Right.
And I've always admired that, even in your, thickest, most sort of gnarly, badass stuff, there always seems to be an awareness of the performer, which is, I find that rare. That type of music, the big, really like blockbuster kind of stuff, it's so much about the wall of sound, not to be a pun about it. I'm sure you've dealt with that for a while.
I was naming the company, so
yeah, exactly right. Yeah, like as much as that's the temptation, to make it somehow a thing where the performers still come through is rare, and it's difficult. It always seems like
I have to say, I really appreciate you saying that, because that's something that only another composer could understand, and I really, really do appreciate that.
It's a tough line to walk,
But I think it's also like a product of my being a mix engineer for so many years before I was a composer. Like, just listening to, like, I remember when I was learning how to be a mix engineer at the place called Platinum Island Studios, no longer exists in Manhattan. The B-52's slave reel for Love Shack was in the vaults at that studio, and late at night, I'm talking 2-3 in the morning, I would just pull that out because no one else was around. And I would just put that up and listen to everything, listen to each track and how unbelievably pristine every single element of that recording was. I mean, from the drums to the bass to the keyboards to the vocals. I mean, it was just so beautifully produced. And I just remember, like, that was me spending the time really listening to the elements of what makes a great mix, right? And every element has to be great in order to be a great result in the end, right? And every single element has to give the other elements room to breathe, right? So there's all this very complex musical chess that you have to play to make that mix really all it can be. And it's not something I always achieve. I'm just saying it's something to strive for, because it is an art form that is inexact. There are a million answers to the same question. There is no right and wrong, but at the end of the day, every element has to sound great. And it's like, I have an assistant. I've always had assistants for the last, 12 years or so. And one of the things I love to do is to teach them to write music for media, and how to tell the story, and how to mix, and how to do all the different things you have to be able to do. And one of the things that, my current assistant, Jim, has been with me for 6 years now. And I always give him tracks to write, not just for, exercise, but, that will end up in the actual game or television show or whatever, because I want them to have that experience of understanding and hearing their stuff back from the product, to give them that satisfaction. I figure, they don't make a lot of money, assistants. So it's really important for me to make sure that they get something out of it. So, one of the things I love teaching is mixing, because it's just like, okay, you hear this track, you hear how woofy it sounds, and it doesn't sound pristine, and you can't hear a certain frequency. Okay, you got to fix that, because that's going to come out in the mix somehow, and it's not going to be a good thing, you know? So that's really fun for me to be a teacher as well.
Yeah, and I've noticed that you've always been the type to really acknowledge your collaborators and shine a light on those, which is, again, that it's not all composers do that. We live in an era where there's a kind of, people enjoy this kind of mystique to the idea of the lone wolf, mad scientist genius. And the reality is, especially on a project of the scope of a Call of Duty, it takes a village. And the composer's job is simultaneously to write the music, but also to kind of captain the ship. And that there's an enormous amount of work that goes in, even just in the captaining part. And so a lot of folks kind of sweep to the side. They want to make it look like I did everything. And I think there's a kind of insecurity that drives that. And you've never been that way. I always see you tagging people online of, I got a lot of people to thank for this one. And like I saw in the case of Black Ops Cold War particular, the whole story of with Ayana and putting together this COVID choir to how do we, singing is like apparently basically the most super spreader thing that you could possibly do.
It's so sad, right? It's so like, I just wanted to do something. And it was like, I literally was in the beginning of this thing, I was like, do I need choir, And then it became, when they finally named, because they didn't name this Cold War until pretty far into production, right? I didn't know that was the name. Once they named it Cold War, I was like, okay, gotta have choir now. and I'm going to find a way to do a choir, even though I can't right now. We're going to figure it out. We're going to record individual voices, whatever. And we did.
That's actually pretty late. I'm actually surprised here because when did you first start?
I think it was
on
like
the game?
April or something.
Exactly. I mean, I would have thought you started on the game, a year ago or more.
No, we started. I got the phone call in November of 2019, but we didn't really start work until February, and then I didn't know what it was called until April, and then we recorded in June, and then we recorded again in end of August for the final stuff. But like, I didn't even have a main theme written until a few weeks before the August session, or September session it was really.
So this one really funneled through relatively tightly.
Yeah, because like I said, Sledgehammer was out, and Treyarch was suddenly had to pick up the mantle and make it work, So right. We were all scrambling a bit, and they didn't have the full thing mapped out yet, and so that happened, over time, and it all worked out great.
How much music did you write then? Over what span of time?
We did. Let's see, about 2.5 hours exactly.
Over and from like, what was the actual
February through September? Yeah, I mean,
okay. That's actually pretty manageable. That's not too
totally.
Fast, but Absolutely. It also means that you're not taking a lot of days off in there. But
it was the pace was perfect. It was like every day was a joy because I wasn't stressed. Like but I was writing. I was productive. And that to me is a lot of time. I've worked in television, done a number of TV shows, and you were talking just about a really interesting topic, and that is giving credit to those people who help you get it done. A lot of people do think that composers work all on their own, and a lot of the time we are, let's face it. But when it comes to collaboration, like, this isn't something that comes naturally to people. I think it's tough because you do want to make your mark, and you do want people to think of you and not somebody else because they did something with you. But over time, like maybe it's my age or my experience, I don't know. But like over time, I have come to value collaboration so much because not only does it always come out better in my view, but I learn things from that composer. Even if they're like, really junior to me and have very little experience, I always learn something from people. Like, how'd you do that? Absolutely. Oh, that's cool. Oh, that's really cool. And then I can take that with me. And I value that. And, I just, and then when it comes to like doing multiplayer sets for the game, I always hire, a number of people because I don't want it to sound all like me. I want the multiplayer sets to sound varied and interesting and different. So I hire really people I consider to be really talented. For example, in Black Ops Cold War for the multiplayer sets, we did 5. I wrote 2 of them. And then I had Daniel James do a couple, and then who's nice. Great. He's the guy who, in case you don't know, is people in your audience don't know. He's the Hybrid 2 guy. He does Project Alpha, Beta, and Chaos, which Chaos was such a great tool that I use all the time, especially on Black Ops. But so Daniel James came in and did a couple, and then Ur Kribos, who's now in Israel. He used to be in Oklahoma or something, went to school there. But I met him at a GDC one day. He handed me like a flash drive with his stuff. And his stuff is so good. I mean, talk about a great producer, like electronic music producer. He's so great.
The funny story about him, I saw him. I was meaning to ask you, and I'm thrilled to hear that connection because I first met him as part of the Gang Scholars Program.
I probably met him that year too.
Yeah, that explains it. Where they for those who are not familiar with Gang, the Game Audio Network Guild, they do a thing at GDC where, if it's your first ever GDC as a composer, you can apply to get a free all access pass, and they'll pair you with someone who's been in the business for a little while to just kind of let you pick their brain. And one day I get, I've mentored or been the brain to be picked on that a bunch of times. And one year it was this guy Oren, and he was like, really he showed up so ready to learn. He showed up like
he's such a great guy, right?
And he had thought about it in advance. He didn't take a second for granted. And he is to date the only one who he goes, "Do you mind if I ask your address?" And I was like, yeah, sure. Okay, fine. Gave him the address of my studio. And then like 3 weeks or something after GDC, a gift of a book that mattered to him shows up in the mail just as a thank you for doing that.
I know he's very thoughtful. Yeah.
It's the only one who's ever done that. And to me, he stood out. It was like, that's a guy I want to see succeed. That's someone who.
Yeah, he same for me. Like he sent me something at the end of this too, and he's just a great guy. He really is.
I love that, and
that's important, right? Because you remember that.
Well, exactly, and I think before you ever have that feeling, I do understand the temptation to want to try to make it sound like, oh yeah, no, I did everything. You should definitely never look anywhere else for anybody. Mm-hmm. Like I get it. It's all born of insecurity, though. But I think
it really is. It really is. Yeah.
But where you're coming from is this to me this far more kind of inspiring perspective of I want to help usher the best possible music out into the world. And there are some genuinely talented people, and the world is better, and this game is better with their contribution. And I take a certain pride in being the guy that said, hey, who could really bring something to this is that person. And right. Now you're a different kind of hero, and it's not that you're sloughing off your own musical contributions in the process or somehow devaluing yourself. To me, it's just an all around better thing just to sort of signal boost those folks and make room for them all in one fell swoop.
Well, I was really inspired by 2 people in that regard, and that was Trevor Morris, who gave me my start in television, far into my career. I mean, I started working with Trevor in 2013.
I was going to say, I'll never forget you and I sitting down opposite each other at a dinner table at some event, and it had been a little while since whatever previous thing had come out, maybe Mass Effect 2 or something. But I was like, hey, what have you been up to? And you really surprised me when you said, actually, I've been jamming on TV. And I was like, really? And yeah, I had no idea. I've only since then come to get to know Trevor, who's a real good guy. But yeah, that was a whole other, you've done a lot of work there since then. It seems like
I've done over 120 episodes of TV. So that, it's a lot of work, for somebody who just started, 7 years ago. I haven't done any lately, unfortunately, but because I miss it. I really enjoy television as well as
it's a totally different headspace.
Yeah. You gotta. It's a whole different skill set, really. But that whole thing is, so he was one guy, and he was so generous with his credit, and what we call in the business cue sheet, very important.
Mm-hmm.
Very generous with that. He's one of my best friends and just a great guy. And then Bear McCreary, he once told me, because I was talking to him at one point about, he's at any given time he'll have like 5 to 10 shows, right? It's like there's no way he's writing all that. So I just said to him, how do you manage all that? And he said, I have to think of myself as the creative director of an enterprise, and that was like, oh yeah, that makes sense, because they're hiring you no matter what, and you're the one who has to make it happen, and they just know that you can deliver that. So, and I get the same feeling from Treyarch. They don't care who I hire, to help out, as long as I'm the guy doing it who they trust can deliver it.
Yeah, you're still the producer. You're still having to bless the mixes, the writing, the choices.
Yeah, and I do, and I probably am even more scrutinizing when another composer's writing for the game, because I know that it's got to sound like me. It's got to sound like it came from the same game, right?
Yeah, of course.
Or it's it's like when I work with Jimmy Henson on stuff, like he and I have co-written all the MP3 multiplayer themes that play in the menu for all the multiplayers for the last 4 games. And or actually, we didn't do one of them. We did 2, 4, and Cold War. And it's just so fun to work with him because he's just a great electronic guy.
Yeah.
And then, but it's a real collaboration because I get in there, we pass the files back and forth like 4 or 5 times, and then I do the final mix. So it's just really. That's a really.
He's such a good dude. He's such a. I really like him.
Such a great guy.
And
it's funny. You and I have been talking about, as much as we love talent, it's really important to be somebody who's personable and that you like, right?
Oh yeah.
That's like just as important, really. So.
Yeah, you could even argue it's more important because if somebody like if Jimmy, will use him as an example, if Jimmy threw something over the fence and for whatever reason, maybe he was having an off day, it just wasn't quite there, your first reaction isn't going to be, dude, we got a job to do here. What the fuck is wrong? And just like go into this attack mode, because your starting position is, I like this guy. I hope everything's okay. Is everything like, I want to have his back. He's got mine. Let's make this about the camaraderie of getting through this together. If something's going on with him and maybe I need to pick up the slack, like, okay, we'll find a way to do that. It's not like, like there's it's not a cash register thing. If you go to a hardware store and you go to buy something and the person is just like super rude or disrespectful, like you have to be a pretty profoundly empathetic person to say, how are you? Are you doing okay? Like, and the best among us would do that, but I don't think it's not ununderstandable to feel like, look, you have one job. I'm not asking a lot here. And yet in a musical collaboration, it's never felt like that to me. It's, like if my orchestrator is suddenly like falling behind on charts and the copyist is sitting on their hands, I know something's going on and I want to make sure that she's good and that like she's in a healthy headspace. I'm never going to suddenly freak out about, holy shit, that we're behind on the charts. Like,
Right.
We'll solve these things in the order that they matter.
Right.
I think that, that comes from just realizing that it's back to your Brian Tuey story. It's the relationships.
And it's also that people are making these things, not robots. It's like they may have other stuff going on. And you run into that a lot, more than you would think. It's like, oh, something's happening. I need to check in and make sure somebody's okay. And that happens a lot, actually.
Yeah, and it really matters because the goal for me is always, I want to I want this to be just another checkpoint in the road with this person, especially with a core team member, someone you collaborate with a bunch. At least for me, that's ideally, you're teeing up a 10, 20, 30, 40 year relationship. And you would have to therefore treat that the way you would treat any other long-term relationship, I think. I mean, it's not that different from marriage or like a lifelong best friend or something, where it has to be born from genuinely mutually caring about each other and not just, hey, can you deliver this? Yes or no?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And they are long relationships. I've worked with people, Ross and Audrey DeRoche, they are my music coordinators, and, they handle so much stuff for me that is, having to do with recording, and it's just such a wonderful thing to have, I could just I've been working with them for 20 years.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah, I
We
think it's
started
so
on
easy
Mystery together in 1999. So
it's so easy to, I think, because especially a lot of the game industry is a little bit more corporate in its structure, where, you hold your job on the basis of, are you delivering? And you hold your job on the basis of, like, is the company healthy enough that it's, we're able to meet our financial projections in order to maintain your salary, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of it does come down to a little bit of just like the cold hard numbers. And in our world, where everything's freelance and these teams are put together in a way ad hoc every time, the relationship is what is informing all of that first and foremost. And so, yeah, it's really about the people. Like, I've lost money on jobs in order to hire my team. Like my mixer, my engineer, right. Those people where I'm like, I want the product to be good and I'm going to take a bath, but this isn't going to be our last rodeo. As a more corporate entity, it's harder, especially if you're like a publicly traded company, though, you're not really in a position to make those kinds of calls, at least so easily.
Yeah.
I want to circle back.
What we do.
Yeah, exactly. I want to circle over to Mass Effect briefly, because I just can't gloss over it. It's just the best thing. I just love it. But I also feel like there's a real, even though I know it's not a happy story, like you said, you felt heartbroken, you said, about not being involved in the third one. You made such a massive stamp on the first two, and to me, it's one of the most, who'd have guessed that Bioware coming out with this new IP kind of seemingly out of nowhere would create truly one of the iconic, celebrated franchises of all time, with some of the most memorable characters and moments. I mean, to me, it is truly one of my most cherished gaming experiences I've ever had. It's one of the only times I can remember credits start to roll and I thought, I've just played one of my lifelong, like, this will be one of my lifelong favorite games. And usually it takes the marination and the passage of time to realize, oh wow, that's really stuck with me. But this was one that just, when the first game ended, and I just thought, oh my God, and I was a late adopter to it too. So where did this? Just kind of give me the rundown on where did this come into your life? This is not a Brian Tuey project, so this was. Yeah. Did you demo like anybody else, or did you come into this? Because I don't think there's a prior relationship with anyone at Bioware, unless I just don't know about it, right?
There was actually. I think it was 2005, maybe, or 2000. It had to be 2004, maybe. Not sure. Do you remember Dave Chan? Do you know Dave Chan? Yeah, Dave Chan was working at Bioware as one of the lead sound designers, and he just pulled me aside at GDC one day and said, "Hey, would you be interested in maybe working on one of our games?" And I was like, "Yes." And that turned out to be Jade Empire. I think I had to audition and won the audition, and did sort of the quasi East meets West Chinese score for that. And that went really well. And then they asked me, they had this new game coming up in 2006. They asked me to audition for, called SFX was the code name for it. And that ended up being Mass Effect. And I auditioned for that and won that audition. So
how did that go in terms of, because I know that, didn't you and Sam Hulick didn't you guys kind of trade material back and forth a bit on that? Because there's some cues that really feel like it's this real marriage of the two of you. Because for the most part, there's a few different composers on Mass Effect, on all of the games. There's a handful.
Yeah,
of
that's
people,
where I started all the collaboration. Out of necessity, I was going through some personal difficulties at the time, and I remember I was trying to write the main theme, and well, before I even get to that point, the first meeting I had with Casey and Shauna Perry and all the people at Bioware, they had me come up to Edmonton, flew me up there, and there's like this hotel that is adjacent to their offices, so I would stay there. I met with them for the first time, and they were like, we were talking about music, and Casey Hudson was explaining his ideas, about this sort of Tangerine Dream, Blade Runner kind of idea. Let's go back in time to the 80s and do some synth work.
And it's really worth highlighting that, because that has become, so ubiquitous. But at the time, especially for something going for,
it was nowhere. No one was doing that. Yeah,
no one was doing it, and especially on a blockbuster, like this is a game with big ambitions kind of level. Maybe a little.
And again, this was one of those times where I said, "Can you do synth work from the '80s?" I'm like, "Yep." I have no idea what the hell I'm doing, but I'm going to do it. And I remember Casey said, "Well, there was one piece of music that we all really liked from like a demo perspective that I'd like to play for you now." And he played Uncharted Worlds, and that wasn't called that then, but that was Sam's piece that he demoed when he was auditioning, right? And I heard it, and I right at the end of it, I was just like, this is probably the stupidest thing in the world to say, but I was so dumbfounded by how good that piece of music was that I said, like, why did you hire me? Like, that is awesome.
I had no idea that piece was
that was a demo.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
That's
still one
amazing.
of my favorite pieces from the entire series.
Oh, and it's people love that.
Yeah, and it was a Arturia patch, that he kind of messed with, and it came out great. And it's almost like you can't even decipher what it is. But it sounds just so right. And
it's really married to the identity of Mass Effect at this point as well.
Yeah, it totally is. So, I was having some personal difficulties, which was pulling my focus. I had, death in the family and some stuff going on. And, it was like I was trying to write this main theme, and I must have done 6 or 7, passes at it. And then, at some point I just said, maybe we can, I can bring in Sam and he can help me do this. So, so Sam came in and he started writing 30-second snippets of stuff that ended up becoming the main theme for Mass Effect. And then I started working with him, and we collaborated on that a little bit, and I did the mix and added some stuff and just tried to make it a little bit, because Sam didn't have a lot of experience with orchestra and stuff at that point.
Right. Sure.
He was kind of a real newbie, and that's why they didn't hire him, because they just didn't know if he could actually handle it. But, we just kept him on, and he kept working on the game, and he wrote several themes. We never worked together except for the main theme, but he wrote a few really important themes for that game. So much so that, like, I was at the end, I was like, let's just have Sam be a co-composer, because that's only fair to him, because he helped write the main theme. He came up with that. He wrote Sovereign's theme, which is really important, a few other things. And so that's how Sam came in. And then I had, like, I think it was Jimmy Hinson wrote a few pieces with us. And then David Cates wrote a few pieces with us, I think, unless I'm confusing that with the next game, Mass Effect 2. But
I remember Richard Jakes also made an appearance in there.
Oh, that's what I'm talking about, Richard Jakes. Richard Jakes wrote. So it was Richard, David, and Jimmy sort of helped flush out. Because at the end, like, we had 50 minutes of music to write in like 2 weeks. It was like that. because all
Wow.
the cinematics came in at the end. So it was like, so basically I was I was sort of the lead on all that, and I would divvy out the work. And so Richard wrote like the Citadel piece, where you come up to the Citadel first, and it was an amalgamation of themes that Sam and I had written, and he just took those themes and crafted this beautiful piece of music, which that was Richard's.
It was really surprising to me, actually, when I dug into it after because I never listened to the music or knew anything about it until after I played it and went digging. And I was actually really surprised to see so many names, because it really all felt surprisingly cohesive.
And that's where, like, I had arguments with Sam at the end where I brought in the writer was sort of like, Sam was trying to write a new piece of music for the ending. And I said, we can't do that. And they were like, why not? But I really like this piece. I said, yeah, it's a great piece of music, but it has nothing to do with the rest of the score. I was like, now's the time to bring back a theme. Right now, this is the time when we bring back Sovereign's theme, or whatever I said, and it's got to be this piece of music. So, and I was having this argument with Mac Walters, who was the head writer, and Sam, because Mac really liked what Sam had done, and I said, I don't think this is the right thing. And so Casey came in to that conversation, and Casey said, no, Jack's right. It's got to be, we have to reprise one of the themes, or the main theme or something. So I can't remember what piece that was, but yeah. And I think Sam ended up using that in a later version of Mass Effect, so it all worked out. But yeah, it's just one of those things where somebody has to have the vision for the score. It can't just be this. See, I felt, that all the music written for Mass Effect 3 was really well produced. I thought better produced than I was doing, frankly. It all sounded really great. But it didn't have like, it felt like almost like you would put a bunch of licensed tunes into it, because it didn't have like a through line. There wasn't like, people weren't guided to, okay, use this theme for this and use that theme for this. But, it was sort of just like everyone's writing these great pieces of music, but there was no cohesiveness to it because there was like 6 composers on it. And it, I don't mean to sound like sour grapes at all. That's not why I'm saying that. I just when I look at it, when I look at it from the 30,000 foot view, that's how I felt when I played that game. Because they would use my music like in weird places, and it was just like, why would you use my? The most important moment of the entire series is when the Reapers come, right? And that's the moment you've been building up to for the entire series, right? Mm-hmm. And the Normandy shows up, and you play the Normandy theme, and it's like, that's way too triumphant for this moment. It's like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you could feel that it became a little bit splintered musically in the third one, and I think your assessment is spot on. Even though you have every right to not be objective, that every individual piece is really there's a lot of really wonderful, very masterful writing and production. But it really is a little bit of a
Chris Leonard's and all those guys. Yeah, great.
Yeah, man. So yeah, it's really it was a touch all over the place compared to how surprisingly tight the first 2 had been. And so
and one of the things that I sort of insisted on, maybe to my detriment in the end, but when we did Mass Effect 2, I said, I have to be the lead composer, because I don't want to. I want to make sure that we have a cohesive experience in Mass Effect 2. It has to be, we did a whole, post-mortem on Mass Effect 1. And as great as that experience was, it was tough because it was, we were bringing another composer into it, and we did have some friction at the end of that. And I'm not used to friction. I don't like friction. I like things to go very smoothly. And I just felt like the reason it didn't go smoothly is because I dropped the ball. I did drop the ball, and I had some personal stuff going on. I let get in the way, and I'm not innocent in in all that. I am not flawless at all. I don't mean to suggest that, but it's just one of those things where you want there to be a sort of cohesive experience. as a composer. At least I do, you know.
I couldn't agree more. And I've been there as well, where personal stuff really interfered with the ability to deliver, and it cost me. So I totally get
Does
that.
that?
And
Yeah.
it's say again.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's just like it's an unfortunate thing that it still haunts me because it was such in a lot of ways it was such a great experience to write for that game. I mean, it's one of the most memorable games out there. I'm so proud of my work on it. I'm so proud to be a part of it, a small part of it, um, and all that. But I just feel like it was also one of the hardest experiences, especially not getting invited back. And yeah, it's tough, man. You know, but you know, it's not all some one person's fault. I had plenty of culpability in that, and I'm not ashamed to say that because I
Well,
learned
and
a
life
ton of
is hard. You know, that's kind of what I was getting at with the work-life balance question of, you know, it's not so easy of just keeping things in nice, neat little bubbles, because it's our life, our, you know, like Jack Wall goes through day-to-day life and spends some of that portion of the day writing music and taking meetings and doing all this, masterminding the next thing, and then dealing with everything else in life. It's like it's all funneling through the same brain. The idea that something personal would not somehow influence the work that you're doing is naive. And it's knowing that is hardly a comfort. It's really challenging to suss those out, especially when it's a thing where, you know, there's like tens of millions of dollars on the line, and you're a not small part of the apparatus that's been built to make that all come off successfully.
that. That's true. Yep. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
well,
back then, I don't think back in 2007 or whatever it was, 2006, when we were making Mass Effect, the first one, and we brought Sam on, that I was back in the mindset of but it has to be all me, you know. And so over my career, I've let go of all that, you know, and that was the beginning of it, where Sam came in, and then I had to say, you know, he deserves credit. I can't not credit him. I'd be a jerk if I didn't do that, right? So I don't even remember if it was up to me or not, but I just felt like, you know, that was the beginning of me letting go a little bit and understanding what the true nature of our job is, and that is
yeah.
you're more of a creative director, like Bear McCreary says. You're responsible for the overall product. Somebody is directly responsible for all of it, and yeah, that was a good lesson for me. Being
I
forced to let go a little bit, you know.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
It is hard.
I've
It's hard, especially when you're young at this and doing it. You know, oh, this is my big break. You know, but
Yeah, and there's also the control freak element of like I'm still very much a work in progress in this way, but in my own sort of analogous moments, I've had, you know, I felt that shift over time of, if I ask someone, hey, could you help me with this little thing here, and they come back with it, and I'm like, well, that's not really how I would have done it. And it's like, well, yeah, obviously that's like that's baked into the premise of this situation. You're not doing it. And so at some point it becomes, okay, how do I look for the things to celebrate in what the person did? And if there's problems with it, if there's things I genuinely disagree with, that's one thing. But just by virtue of it not being me does not somehow knock it down a point, as if I'm the default state of musical perfection and everything therefore is just inherently lesser. It's like you have to get over the insecurity and really look at that and say, oh wow, that's so cool, I wouldn't have written that, you know. And
that's right. That's the whole point right there.
It can
For
be
me,
hard. Yeah,
yeah,
it can be a challenge.
yeah,
But
yeah. I've definitely learned to embrace the differences. I mean, you know, you like you said, you do have to keep it on point for what you know, what makes it still work in the score. Are there the right
of course,
fragments of melody or whatever leitmotif is in there, or just sort of nodded to maybe. And then it's really cool. Like I love it. Like to be honest with you, I love it when somebody takes my melody and does their own thing with it, but it's still my melody. It's a little bit selfish, but it's just really cool to see what somebody else would do with that.
They reveal things that you yourself would have been blind to.
Yeah. Well, it also, in a way, it almost legitimizes your melody too, because somebody else took it and did something with it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I guess that is a good melody because I'm hearing it totally differently and I can hear that it's good, rather than being so far into it you don't even know anymore. But
Well,
yeah.
you've been real generous with your time, but I have one. There's one last thing that it would be absolutely insane to gloss over. The I moved to Los Angeles in 2005,
Yeah.
and one of the very first experiences I had upon moving here was Video Games Live at the Hollywood Bowl, and
Oh, wow.
subsequently saw you conduct that show many times.
Hmm.
And what you and Tommy created there is really unlike anything else. And for someone who's, been living in the studio and writing piles of great music, to have helped create this public, uh, like this way for people to celebrate this music. I mean, talk about propping up colleagues too. I mean, how many zillions of other composers' pieces have you conducted at this point?
Yeah,
And
quite a few.
I know
Yeah.
it's been a number of years. I know that you hung up that hat a while ago. But it just needs acknowledgement that being part of Video Games Live and helping, from the beginning, that and big giant TV special and all the rest of it. I mean, that was such a powerful force in helping to legitimize the art to the outside world, who basically just thought, oh, it's just like those sounds coming out of a Game Boy, I assume. That's what video
Yeah.
game music is.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Um,
The whole thing, and especially in 2005 when we were starting, was like, why would anybody want to hear bleeps and bloops played by an orchestra? Yeah, it was. That was that was the tough thing. That's a perfect example of like, never saying no. Like, it's just like, hey, we have this idea. Let's see if we can do something with it, and then just pitching it to a few people, and then you get some attorney who says, "Oh, this guy at William Morris might be interested in this," and then we pitched it to him. And Tommy's a great pitcher. I'm going to give him all the credit for that. And then, the agent at William Morris saying, "Yeah, we're going to make this happen. Let's do it. Let's do a deal with Clear Channel," which then became Live Nation. And they gave it back to us because they had to spin it off into Live Nation. So they put $2 million into the formation of that show, and then they gave it back to us. So
that's lucky.
it was just a lot of luck and a lot of just right place at the right time. Then Tommy and I just took it and ran with it ourselves, learned how to do it, learned how to be performers, learned how to, put a show together, learn how to produce a big show. I mean, we did huge shows, and then we worked with big television producers for PBS and did that thing. And oh, Jesus, it was really, really a lot of fun. I think I did 155 shows as a conductor.
That's what I was going to ask,
About
is how many?
60 different orchestras around the world, and wonderful. And I did it for 5 years and quit in 2010 to get back to composing because I was kind of losing the thread there. And Tommy's kept this going for another 10 years, twice as long as when I was with it. So kudos to him for making that happen. But yeah, it was a great experience. I learned a lot. I remember conducting, I think it was my third show conducting, where I was a fairly new conductor. I hadn't done a lot of conducting live, especially. And I remember being in Houston with the Houston Symphony, huge symphony. I mean, we had like, I don't know, 90 people in the symphony, and there was like 70 people in the choir. And I remember walking out in rehearsal and just being completely overwhelmed. Like, oh my God, I have to control 160 people right now musically. And I remember thinking, act like just act like you know what you're doing, dude, because you have never done this before. And it all went off. And I remember going back to, Cindy was not at that show. She was home. And I called her up and I started crying. I was like, I don't know why I'm here. I shouldn't be here. This is way over my head. But, I pulled it off. And I was never that scared again. So you gotta push yourself. That's my
well, and you gotta
my wisdom, my pearl of wisdom there.
And it's such a recurring theme of your career and most of our careers at some level or another, that we if you put yourself in the position where you have to solve it creatively, you have to fall, you have to rely on yourself, or maybe, reaching out to friends or whomever. But if you put yourself in the position, that fight or flight instinct, you'll figure it out. If the sort of all other choice is catastrophic failure and destruction, you're probably not going to go that route. You're probably going to solve it. And it's, I mean, a lot of people, I get so many emails saying, how do I know when I'm ready? And I'm like, you will learn that you were ready when you're looking back on it and say, I guess it turns out I was ready. At no point will you feel that in advance about anything.
No, and you should, and hopefully you will never feel that in advance, because that's part of you learn that's part of the fun of it. I mean, I'm craving something. What haven't I done that I never thought I could do? I mean, that's what I'm looking for now. Like, what can I do that's even bigger?
Well, I look forward to your speed metal album.
That probably won't happen, but I'll leave that to the experts. But
we'll see. Well, man, I really appreciate you doing this.
Dude, you're such a good interviewer, and it's such a pleasure, man. I love your style of interview. This conversational style is so welcome. I love it.
Well, anytime. I really don't think of it as an interview. I think of it, when our friends at DICE asked me if I'd be interested in doing this, it was like, so wait a minute, I get to sit down with people I really like and am friends with and have huge amounts of admiration for and consider myself a genuine fan of, and we get to actually just talk some shop. Like, how horrible, what a flawed premise. It's a privilege to be able to do this and to sit in this chair, even if it's right now just the chair in my studio instead of some, like the very first one of these was with Jason Graves in a hotel room in San Francisco during GDC.
Nice.
And
that's cool.
That to me was what this normally was, and then only recently have we switched to the remote COVID version. But it is it's a privilege.
Yeah, well,
man.
I look forward to when we can be in the same room again, brother. It's going to be way too long when that happens. But I think you and Emily Reese are probably the best people to have a conversation with. Yeah, I mean, she's great too. You guys are like the Terry Gross of game music,
That's funny. Well, I appreciate it, man. It's a pleasure and a joy. And enjoy London. You're off to, I guess, Portugal.
Yeah,
next?
We're gonna go spend a couple months there and check it out and see what's what. I mean,
did you take any kind of mobile rig with you, or are you just taking a break?
I didn't, but I might have to put one together because I got some music coming up in January, and I don't think I'll be home yet. So I may have to quickly figure that out. I do have my laptop, so it shouldn't be too hard.
Quite the bohemian.
I'll get my assistant to ship me out a drive or something.
I love it.
See how that goes. Yeah, cool.
All right, man. Well, enjoy it. Give my best to Cindy, and we'll talk soon.
I will do. Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.